I used to work as a night restock worker at a supermarket in a somewhat rural town. The store was called Great American, the biggest and best supermarket in the area. My shift started as soon as the store closed at 10 p.m., and I worked until 3 a.m., restocking the shelves and organizing everything for the next day. I had keys to the store for after-hours access, and it was usually a team of two, myself and either Terry, Carter, or Alfonso. That night I was supposed to be working with Terry. I arrived at the store and let myself in through the back, where all the inventory yet to be stocked was kept. I started my work using the pallet jack to bring a whole pallet of boxes out to the shopping floor. I began with the bread and nuts aisle, rotating the older loaves to the front and putting the newer loaves in the back. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't seen Terry yet. I walked to the back area where we left our belongings, but he wasn't there. I left the back door slightly open with a door stopper for him. After another half hour with no sign of Terry, I went back to the store's rear. He still wasn't there, but I noticed the back door was shut. I assumed Terry was somewhere in the store. I opened the back door and saw the door stopper outside, which I found odd. I called Terry, and he answered, sounding like he was in bed. He told me he wasn't coming in because he was sick. Suddenly, I got the chills. I told him about the door stopper, and he said it could have just come undone by itself. Nobody else was scheduled to work that night. I told him to feel better and hung up. I wasn't convinced the door stopper came undone by itself because I had kicked it under the door pretty tightly. I did a quick look around to make sure no one was in the back of the store, and not seeing anyone, I went back to work. Although I felt a slight sense of unease, I continued stocking the bread. Then I heard a loud sound echo from across the shopping floor. Someone had to be in here. I got off my knees and went to the middle aisle that intersected all the other aisles. I looked straight down the aisle and stood there for a moment. All the way on the opposite side of the store, in the dairy aisle, a man dressed in black walked past the middle aisle, looking in my direction. I felt my heart drop, reminiscent of the scene from the movie Signs where the alien walks past the birthday party. I tried to think logically, considering maybe someone else was filling in for Terry's shift that our boss didn't tell me about. I started to speed walk down the center aisle, yelling "excuse me" very loudly. I looked left down every aisle I passed. At the end of one of those aisles, he was standing there, fully facing my direction. When he saw me, he walked out of sight in the direction I had just come from. I yelled "excuse me" again and started to run down that aisle to catch up to him. I didn't get a good look at his face yet. When I got to the front of the aisle by the cash registers, I looked down the direction he went and saw him all the way at the end by the bread aisle. Half his body was hidden behind the shelf, his mouth hanging open, and he started to wave me over without saying anything. His face was freaking me out. I attempted one more time to speak to him and asked, "Who are you?" He disappeared behind the shelf. I wasn't being paid enough for this. I went outside to sit in my car and call my boss. I told him there was some random freak roaming around the store. He told me to either get him out of there or call the police. I wasn't going to attempt to physically remove a crazy person from the store, so I called 911. I waited in my car until a police car showed up. I greeted the officer and asked him to follow me inside. We walked around looking for the man and saw him at one of the aisles, standing there as if playing a game. When the police officer commanded him to come, he actually listened. He was put in handcuffs, and he was the strangest man I'd ever seen. He kept smiling and looking at me nonstop, licking his lips, with huge bags under his eyes. The only words he spoke were in response to the police officer, saying he was looking for a snack. I didn't like the way he was looking at me as the police officer walked him outside to the car. It was a menacing, threatening smile that I haven't forgotten to this day. After that, I went back to work, but the atmosphere felt different. Every sound seemed amplified, and every shadow seemed to move. I was jumpy, constantly looking over my shoulder. The fear from earlier had subsided, but a lingering unease remained. It was hard to concentrate on my work, but I pushed through, determined to finish my shift. I finished restocking the bread aisle and moved on to the next section, but I couldn't shake the image of that man's unsettling smile. It was burned into my memory. Every time I turned a corner or reached for a box, I half expected to see him standing there again, watching me. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I was on edge until my shift ended. I locked up the store, double-checking all the doors, and made sure everything was secure before leaving. As I drove home, I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. The next day, my boss called to check on me and to discuss the incident. He reassured me that the police would be investigating and that they would increase security measures to ensure nothing like this happened again. Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. From that night on, I never left any doors open, and I made sure to stay vigilant during my shifts. The incident had left a mark on me, a reminder of how quickly things could go from routine to terrifying. In a small town where not much usually happened, this event became a local story. People talked about the strange man for weeks, speculating about who he was and what he was doing in the store. For me, it was a lesson in staying alert and cautious, especially during those long, solitary nights. I once booked an Airbnb by myself in Arizona for a job interview. Since it was far from home, I decided to make a short trip out of it. I chose this specific Airbnb because it was much cheaper than any hotel I could find. It was about half an hour away from where I'd be interviewing, which was fine with me. It was off a dead-end, secluded road and had a nice view of the desert in the backyard. I brought my laptop with me to get work done for my current job during the day, which kept me busy most of the time. I stayed for 3 days, with my interview scheduled for the second day, a Tuesday. I planned to leave on Friday. On Monday night, the night before my interview, I was practicing interview questions and researching the company on my laptop in the living room. It was around 9 p.m. when I heard a tap at the window. It wasn't exactly a knock, more like someone's finger tapping the glass. Instinctively, I turned to look at the window but saw nothing. It was pitch black outside, and I was scared to look out, but I mustered the courage. I saw no one, just the darkness of the desert. I convinced myself it might have been a bug hitting the window and went back to my work. The next day I had my interview and felt it went well. For the rest of my trip, I explored the town, ate at different restaurants, and relaxed in the backyard. Little did I know, I was likely being watched while I was out there. That night, I was inside watching Breaking Bad on Netflix when it happened again, a single tap at the window. This time it was clear it wasn't a bug. I rushed to the window but saw no one. That didn't mean someone wasn't out there. I checked the windows by the front door, then opened the door and looked outside for a second. Seeing no one, I went back inside and checked the back door. I stepped outside onto the porch and looked out into the desert, silence and darkness. Then I heard a click, like someone clicking their tongue at the roof of their mouth. It was off in the distance, beyond the light from the house, somewhere in the cold desert. I felt as though someone could be hiding behind any number of bushes, watching and toying with me. I yelled out, and almost in response, there was another click. I pinpointed the direction and saw someone standing not too far away, dressed in dark clothes blending into the darkness. I started walking closer, then stopped, realizing I didn't want to get any closer. I called out, "You're on private property. I'm going to call the cops if you don't leave the person," eerily, and quickly walked away. I theorized it might have been the Airbnb owner, but that seemed far-fetched. I didn't know what to think. The next night I was in bed on my laptop watching Breaking Bad again before going to sleep. I watched for about an hour and a half, giving some thought to the encounter from the night before. When I finally turned off the light and tried to sleep, within 10 seconds, there was a click sound, muffled from inside the closet. I looked at the closet door, which was open just a crack. In a natural response, I sprang off the bed, still in my PJs, and ran to the car. I sat in the driveway with the car running and called 911. I stared at the house while talking to the dispatcher, waiting to see if anyone would come out since all my stuff was still inside. A police car arrived, and the officer and I did a quick investigation of the small house. There weren't many places to hide, and we found no one. Despite this, I packed my stuff and left that night for a nearby hotel. I contacted both Airbnb and the host, but I was only able to get a partial refund for my stay. I still think it might have been the host of the Airbnb. Who else would have access to the house? There were no signs of forced entry, which leads me to believe whoever it was may have had a key. But maybe I'm wrong. Perhaps it was a stranger who snuck in at an opportune time.